The Compliance Perspectives podcast is sponsored by Case IQ, a global provider of whistleblowing case management and compliance solutions. Learn more at caseiq.com. Welcome to the Compliance Perspectives podcast. I'm Adam Turtletop from the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics and Healthcare Compliance Association. Joining us today from Beaverton, Oregon is Rob Stratton. Rob is author of the chapter Enterprise Risk Management in Healthcare in the 2024 Complete Healthcare Compliance Manual. He's also Executive Director, Enterprise Risk and Security, Corporate Compliance Official, and Senior Counsel for Northwest Permanente. Rob, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today and for writing the chapter. And I'm really looking forward to a conversation about enterprise risk management. First, sort of foundationally, why from both a regulatory and practical perspective are risk assessments essential?
Well, thank you for having me. So risk assessments aren't new, and in many specific incidents, regulatory required. So for HIPAA security rule, you have to have a risk assessment about your data protection. And a corporate integrity agreement would have often required a risk assessment every year, but these are a very specific focus. What's interesting, the trend right now is the systematic, holistic approach to risk assessments in an enterprise risk management program. So recent guidance by the DOJ on effective compliance program specifically mentions having an ERM program. And along with the Caremark cases in corporate law, requiring boards to make sure that management has a holistic, systematic risk assessment program. So with this new focus, risk assessment becomes even more important to do generally and as a best practice to ensure that you're looking at everything holistically.
And I think you got to something very important there, which is the need to think of compliance in this holistic view and understand what it's a part of. Now, what are some of the enterprise risk management challenges specific to healthcare?
Well, healthcare is very unique in how complex it is. So you have insurance and you have humans involved as far as patient care. So that's highly regulated. You have highly licensed state licensed professionals. You have a lot of money involved. You have complex organizational structures in hospitals and provider groups. So these all add so much complexity that most other industries don't have. So risk assessments become very important, and especially looking at a holistic enterprise risk management program to understand the risks that sometimes is hidden through the complex nature of healthcare companies.
And the complexity can be endless. Now, how can the organization best gather the data it needs to identify risk?
Well, another great thing about healthcare companies is that we have lots of data. So we also often have data from our ERH programs, Epic, for example, what a lot of provider groups use, or other electronic health records produce lots of data on patient throughput and things like that, operational data. So all these data sources need to be identified. Too much data is a problem, so you also have to understand what the risk you're looking for and what data would indicate that you're reaching a risk threshold or indicate that you're past a threshold. So the data sources are not the end all be all. You also want to make sure that you are bringing qualitative sources. So you're experts. So nurses on the front line, doctors on the front line often know what the problems are, the risks are before the data shows it. So you want to bring those sources into governance committees and other ways for them to report and provide feedback on what they're seeing on the ground.
Frontline eyes really are what are so important in this area. I mean, it's often easy to lose track of where things really are without that data coming in from the docs and others. Now, once the risks are identified, how do you divide up your plans for addressing them?
Well, there's the four major categories of mitigating risk. You can transfer, you can accept it, you can mitigate, and you can just avoid it, stop doing whatever practice that's causing the risk. Healthcare being what healthcare is, though, you really can't cleanly do any one of those things. So even when you're transferring risk to an insurance company, say for medical malpractice, your medical malpractice insurer isn't going to just say, we're going to take the risk and you don't have to do anything. They're going to want you to mitigate risk as well as transfer it to them. So because of that, things don't cleanly fall into those groups. You have to look for other ways. So another tools are looking at heat maps to understand where your risks are compared to others and where they relate. Um, and the other thing is just creating a culture of people aware of the risks and aware of the organizational stance on particular risks so they can make day-to-day decisions to lower that risk.
And really, as you point out, you can't make it go away. It's just you have to figure out what the best way to deal with it is. So once the assessment's done, what's the best way to put plans in place for managing those risks?
Well, I just mentioned culture, and I don't know of any other way other than culture, because you can have from the top down, and the laws requiring boards and officers to implement these ERM programs. Um, but your board and your CEO can tell the company all day long to do something. That doesn't mean anybody will do it or do it more than the bare minimum. So it really is a culture, a risk-aware culture that's so important. Once the assessment's done, understanding what your risk appetite is, what your risk tolerance is, and translating that down to each level of the company. So mid-management, frontline, so they know their place and what the company stance is. For example, in my own company, we have multiple risk appetites for different categories of risk so that people in the finance group know how much risk they should be accepting in their day-to-day, which might be different than what operations doing. So when patient safety is in play. So just everyone understanding their place and understanding a tangible level of risk and level of outcome the company will accept is very important.
So as the compliance team participates in the enterprise risk management exercise, what are some of the key things we should be letting the rest of the business know, about what compliance risks are, and do so in a way that's more positive and not just, oh, you're going to get in trouble for that?
So, in healthcare compliance, at least in my experience, there is the tendency to be very siloed. So let's be compliant with HIPAA, but for example, but it's becoming more the norm, I believe, that compliance departments are monitoring compliance in other areas. So becoming a partner of that. So not being the cop, not being the court saying, oh, we assess this risk is high, go do something, you did something wrong. It's being a partner early on, and understanding that the compliance risk is just business risk these days.
Which I think is more than fair thing to say. So, is there anything that's like the one common mistake you see people make the most when it comes to performing risk assessment that you absolutely have to avoid?
The risk assessment at the point in time when there's a problem gets people's defensive. And I think that is one of the biggest thing to be avoided is you do the risk assessment proactively, regularly, as part of doing business, and you're identifying risk before there's a problem. Because once people think there's a problem, that's when they are going to hide information or be defensive or distract from where the risk is because at that point they're worried about their jobs, for example. So being proactive, doing it annually, semi-annually to prevent the issue that would in the past would have caused the risk assessment. You do the risk assessment to prevent.
And that's a great admonition, and something that's important to remember, even when you're probably doing one when there is a crisis, to let the people you're working with know, hey, I'm not looking to cast blame here. What we're looking to do is how we go forward in a positive way to make sure that we don't have this problem again, or we're better equipped when the problem comes up. Well, Rob, thank you again for sharing your insights with us both today and within the chapter of the Complete Healthcare Compliance Manual. I want to thank all of you for taking the time to listen. I'm Adam Turtletop from SCCE and HCCA. I hope we're able to expand your compliance perspective.